Kabul in the 1970s was a very progressive city. Like women walked around in mini skirts. There were discotheques. There were hippies bouncing around the plains of northern Afghanistan smoking. Like it was, I mean, you still had the rural issues, but it was a pretty progressive society. And it was the Soviet occupation that set all that going backwards. People think that Afghanistan has been like this backward land, and in some ways it is very status, but it was pretty darn progressive in the 70s. All except these over-the-horizon strikes like we did with Zawahiri. Great, we got him, and kudos to the intelligence community for making that happen. But Shawn, we saw over-the-horizon strikes when we were trying to get bin Laden before 9/11. Like, there's just no substitute for the ground intelligence network. You know this better than anybody. And there's no substitute for a partner force who can resist at a local level and be that antibody. Both of those were abandoned wholesale in Afghanistan on August 15th. And they're still somewhat intact. And these volunteer groups have manifests of Afghan commandos, KKA, intelligence officials that, yes, want to get out of the country, but if they were extradited or brought out of the country, they could become huge assets for countering violent extremism. And we did. And then we just took it chunk by chunk. You know, we were like, well, he can move through the crowd. He's a friggin' commando. Like, he'll get, and he's little, you know. But what about, how are we going to get him past the guards? You know, who do we need to talk to there? What are we going to do that he doesn't have a visa? Like, how are we going to get him manifested? And people just took different chunks of it. And, you know, we do what we do.
Was everybody special operations that was involved?
No. Congressman Mike Waltz, who is Special Forces and is a friend of mine, we fought together in Afghanistan. I called him, and he actually loaned us one of his staffers. Her name is Liv in the book. We changed her name. But she could, you know, I knew we were going to need to kind of breach some doors on the political side and come in with some juice. So we could have done a much better job of continuing those relationships in those areas, and we didn't. So you had these start and stops every 6 months to a year.
Okay. But still, it's another SF unit.
It was another SF unit with an appreciation for that kind of work, and they would typically build on what the other team had done to some degree. But you know the deal. I mean, you bring 3rd group in and 7th group, even if it's 1 ODA from each.
Yeah.
The cultures are so different, and how they think about the world, and just the pre-existing rivalries even. Overall, it was pretty good, but it could have been so much better. But he's saying the same things. Al-Qaeda has completely reconstituted. The strike on Ayman Zawahiri, who was the number 2 under bin Laden and then the number 1, shows us that he was standing on the porch of an affluent Kabul neighborhood in broad daylight.
Yeah.
He was there as a guest of the Taliban. General, gosh darn it, another Afghan Special Operations general recently talked at a conference that I was at, and he said that the Taliban are actually issuing passports and visas to foreign fighters to live comfortably in Afghanistan. We know for a fact that foreign fighters from Syria, Iraq, Al-Qaeda foreign fighters from North Africa, and even Southeast Asia are back in Afghanistan training openly on former Afghan army bases in Helmand and Kandahar. So we got to check in on each other. 56% of veterans, of Afghan war veterans say that, 2/3 say that resettlement of Afghans would help their mental health. So how can we get involved in helping our veteran population see their partners find safe passage and get resettled? A lot of this moral injury comes from that. The State Department could do this tomorrow. They have the authorization to do it now. So I believe pressure in this midterm election on our elected officials, both at the administration and congressional level. This is not a Republican or Democrat issue. This is an American issue. But if we really want to fight for what our veterans did, particularly these volunteer groups and in the war, is put pressure on our elected officials to help with safe passage for the most at-risk Afghans, really double down on resettlement here.
Let's talk about his journey. How long did it take? What did you do?
So, the thing is here's another thing that was interesting is we told him, take pictures of all your certificates and your tabs. He went to the Q course, so he has like an SF tab.
Okay.
And the certificate of completion. And we said, take pictures of all that, send it to us. We're going to upload it on the cloud. Wipe your phone and burn all that stuff. So he starts a fire out in the backyard. That's actually how my book starts, is him burning all his stuff. When he got to the SF tab and the certificate, he couldn't burn it. So he stuffed it down in his gym bag. And the crazy thing is, I interviewed dozens of commandos, KKA, Afghan Special Forces. Not one of them burned their stuff when we told them to. They all carried it. They would walk out to the link-up point with a green chem light on, and then the flock that was in the queue would get instructions to move into the link-up mechanism. They would drop down into an open sewage canal, move through that to the green chem light, and then they would show the pineapple on their phone, challenge and password, check the baseball card, get pulled through the 4-foot hole, driven across the airfield onto the aircraft.
Fucking amazing. Amazing.
And that was the Pineapple Express. And what I have to tell you is, I had nothing to do with that shit. That was these junior leaders, junior leaders, that's not the right term, younger guys like Zach and John and Jesse, who they just came up with this stuff. And I found that in my old age, one of the things about leadership is knowing when to get out of the way. But the bottom line is, I think we are a couple of years out from a catastrophic attack that's going to come from this unfettered safe haven. And I'll leave you with this scenario. Let's assume that 2 to 3 years from now, we suffer a strike in the U.S. and it's on par with 9/11. And I don't think that's a stretch, considering the level of freedom of action that Al-Qaeda and ISIS-K are being afforded in Afghanistan, right? So let's just assume that an attack happens here, and it is catastrophic. And out of the ashes, and when the dust clears, you have an America that is reminiscent of 9/12/2001. The country music songs are playing, the Budweiser commercials are going strong, the yellow ribbons are on the trees. Except this time it's, your son and mine that are loaded up on these airplanes, on these C-17s, and are deployed over for a retribution operation. How could you ask these men and women, this noble, fragile class of people who are truly the moral compass of our nation, how could you put this on them like that? Knowing that they can't hang up the phone. And a year later, 73% of veterans feel betrayed. 67% feel humiliated. There's been an 81% spike in calls to the VA hotline since August. And there's friends of mine in Pineapple, like Perry Blackburn, who's lost his job. Duke lost his job. He had a high-paying job. They've cashed in their savings accounts, their kids' education funds to pay for safe houses, food drops. We had 20 babies born in safe houses in Operation Recovery, a group that was paying for our manifest to keep them alive through the winter. So you're running combat operations straight with no break, no leave, and you think about the toll that takes on one's body, one's mental health. And that's where Nizam was. He was at a place where the night terrors were getting so bad, and he would talk to me about them on the phone. And so a handful of us talked him into getting out, becoming a contractor. He was guarding infrastructure when all of this happened, and trying to get his SIV. And it had been a year, and there was no movement on it from the State Department, like so many other applicants.